I want to be clear about one thing before I tell you any of this. I am not a hero. I am a man who, for most of his adult life, could barely keep his own roof from leaking. I am a man who burned pasta and had to throw the pot away. I am a man whose most impressive skill, if you asked my former colleagues, was an ability to find parking spots in downtown Seattle during rush hour. That's it. That's the whole list. I tell you this because what happened to me 17 months ago doesn't make any sense if you picture a hero at the center of it. It only makes sense if you picture a very tired, very ordinary 38-year-old man who happened to be standing in the right parking lot at the wrong time. Or maybe the right time. I'm still not sure which one it was. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm a structural engineer. I design bridges, the unglamorous kind, the underpasses and overpasses, and the county road spans that nobody takes a photograph of, that just exist to get cattle trucks from one side of a river to the other without incident. I'm good at my job in the way that good structural engineers are always good at their jobs, quietly, invisibly, and without anyone ever knowing until the thing they built is still standing 30 years later. My daughter Emma was 8 years old when this started. She had my brown eyes and her mother's nose and an opinion about everything, which she got from both of us in equal measure. She collected rocks, not the interesting ones, not geodes or quartz crystals or anything with obvious visual appeal. She collected ordinary gray rocks that she found on sidewalks and parking lots and called them her pavement friends. She had 73 of them in a shoebox under her bed, and she could tell you where she found each one. That's my kid. That's who I was raising. Emma's mother, my ex-wife Claire, had moved to Portland 3 years earlier. We'd ended things cleanly, as these things go, which mostly meant we'd ended them without lawyers screaming at each other and with a custody agreement that was, in theory, equitable. Emma spent school weeks with me and alternating weekends with Claire. It worked. Not perfectly, but it worked the way underpasses work, without drama, without applause, functional. I'd been single for 3 years when I met Dara. I say met loosely. We were introduced by a mutual friend at a barbecue in July, and she was charming and funny, and she didn't seem to mind that I talked about load-bearing tolerances for 20 minutes straight, which I took as a sign of either genuine interest or extraordinary patience. It turned out to be the second one, but I didn't know that yet. We dated for 14 months. She moved in. Emma accepted her with the cautious optimism of a child who has already learned that adults make promises they sometimes can't keep, and who therefore reserves final judgment indefinitely. They never quite clicked. Dara and Emma, I saw it. I told myself it was an adjustment period. I told myself it took time. I told myself a lot of things that convenient people tell themselves when they don't want to see what's directly in front of them. I proposed in April. Dara said yes. Emma said okay. 8-year-olds are terrible liars, but they are also very polite when they think it matters. The Galactic Trade and Cultural Exchange Compact, what most people call the GTCE, or just the Compact, had been signed 6 years before this story starts, which meant by the time Emma was old enough to remember a world with aliens in it, she'd already grown up in one. The arrival hadn't been the dramatic event the movies had always promised. There was no invasion fleet, no presidential address from a bunker, no speech about humanity's finest hour. There was a transmission, then a delegation, then 18 months of extraordinarily tedious international bureaucracy. And then one morning, the news ran a segment about an alien family who had opened a restaurant in Chicago, and it made the kind of gentle, curious headlines that suggested the world was going to be fine. We were not a border town. We were not a major city. Seattle had its alien district, a small cluster of businesses and a community center about 12 blocks from Pike Place. But in the suburb where I lived, in the quiet grid of streets and school bus stops and chain coffee shops, you mostly only noticed that the world had changed if you went looking for it. Emma noticed. She always went looking. She'd been to the alien district 4 times with her school and twice with me on weekends, and she had opinions about it in the way she had opinions about everything. Firmly, specifically, and with reference to concrete evidence. The Vithan food, she said, tasted like someone had tried to make soup out of a thunderstorm. The Kalari architectural style that some buildings in the district used looked like somebody was scared of right angles. She meant both of these as compliments. Emma's compliments were always structurally unusual. I'm telling you this background because you need to understand that what happened in that parking lot was not, to me, a cultural crisis or a political event or a test of humanity's character. It was just something that happened on a Wednesday night in late October while I was walking back to my car after getting groceries. The parking lot behind the store was mostly empty. It was 8:47 p.m. I know the time because I checked my phone looking for a text from Emma's sitter, and the overhead lights had that particular orange-yellow pallor that makes everyone look like they haven't slept in a week. I heard them before I saw them. Not crying exactly. It was something lower than crying and more desperate, a kind of sound that I'd never heard before, thin and woven together in a way that reminded me of interference patterns, of 2 signals overlapping. It was coming from behind a recycling bin at the far end of the lot. I found them crouched there together, pressed so tightly against each other that in the dim light they looked like a single small shape. Twin girls. Alien girls. Vithan, I thought, based on the coloring, pale skin with a faint bioluminescent undertone that pulsed very softly at the temples and along the collarbone, a pale lavender silver that I'd seen described in Emma's school handouts. Their hair was white silver, cut short and uneven on both of them. Their eyes, when they finally looked up at me, were enormous, large irises, amber gold in color, with vertical pupils like a cat's, and they reflected the parking lot light back at me with a faint, uncanny shimmer. They were wearing human clothes. Children's clothes, jeans, sneakers, small puffy jackets in different colors, one green and one navy. The clothes were real and fitted and clean, which meant someone had dressed them deliberately and recently, which meant someone had left them here deliberately and recently. They could not have been older than 6 or 7. Maybe younger, though I later learned that Vithan children have different development timelines than humans, and I was probably reading their size incorrectly. I crouched down to their level. I said very carefully, "Hi, are you okay? Are you hurt?" They looked at each other. Then they looked back at me. The one in the green jacket said something, not in English, not in any language I recognized, quiet and rapid, directed at her sister. The one in the navy jacket answered with 2 syllables, and then pressed her face against her sister's shoulder. "Do you speak English?" I asked. "English, or I don't know if you have translation devices or—" The one in the green jacket reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small disc, flat and circular, about the size of a quarter. She pressed it against the side of her own jaw just below the ear. She said something again, and this time it came out layered, her own voice underneath, and then, a half-second behind it, an English translation in a flat, affectless tone, like a phone's text-to-speech. She said, "She is not hurt, I am not hurt, we are waiting." Waiting for what? She looked at her sister again. Some kind of conversation passed between them that I couldn't read. Then she looked back at me and said, carefully, "We are waiting for our person to come back." "Your person?" I repeated it because I didn't know what else to do with it. "Do you mean your parent, your mom or dad?" "The female parent," she said. "She said to wait here." "How long ago did she say that?" Another glance at her sister, a long pause, a long time. I sat down on the asphalt. I just sat down, right there in the parking lot, because my legs decided that crouching was no longer tenable, and because something in my chest had already understood what my brain was still arguing about. "What's your name?" I asked. "Sella," said the one in the green jacket. She put her hand on her sister's arm. "She is Myra." I'm Daniel, I said. Do you need help? Sela thought about this for a long time. I watched her think about it, really think about it, weigh it, look at me and look at her sister and look at the empty parking lot and look at the sky. Yes, she said, I think we need help. I need to explain what I did next, because I know how it looks. I called the police. I want to be absolutely clear about this. I called the police immediately within 2 minutes of finding them, and I explained what I'd found and where I was, and I stayed on the line while they said units were en route, and then I stayed with the girls in the parking lot until the cruiser arrived. That is the correct thing to do. I knew it was the correct thing to do. I did it. The police arrived. And then the alien welfare liaison arrived. Seattle had a small office by then, part of the GTCE integration framework. And then a second, more senior liaison arrived. And then a woman from a different agency with a tablet and a very tired expression. What we established over the next 2 hours, standing in and around that parking lot, and then in the station waiting room where they brought the girls and where I stayed because Sela had, at some point, taken hold of my sleeve and not let go. The girls were Vithan, as I'd guessed. 7 years old, I'd been wrong about that, but Vithan children are typically smaller than human children at the same age, or so I was told. Their names were Sela and Myra Aviath Doran. They had been living in Seattle for 8 months, with their father who was Vithan, and with a stepmother who was, this part was important, it turned out human. The human stepmother's name was not in any record I was ever given. I only ever thought of her by the role, the stepmother. Their biological mother had died when they were 3. Their father, whose name was Dorek Aviath, was a trade liaison working under the GTCE Cultural Exchange Program. He had been stationed on Veth's orbital relay station for the past 6 weeks on an assignment that had been extended unexpectedly. He was trying to get back. He had been trying for 4 days. The stepmother had been left as the primary caregiver. The stepmother had dropped the girls in the parking lot of a grocery store at approximately 6 p.m. and driven away. The translation from the alien welfare liaison was clinical and careful, and said something like, primary caregiver abandoned the children at a location without arranging alternate care. The translation in my own head was shorter and louder, and I didn't repeat it out loud because there were children present. The liaison's name was Petra Vance. She was about 50, with reading glasses perpetually perched on top of her head, and she had the look of someone who had seen enough of the world that very little surprised her anymore. She sat down across from me in the waiting room and said, "Mr. Marsh, you found them, you called it in. You've been with them for 2 hours. Can I ask, do you have any prior relationship with these children or their family?" "No," I said. "I've never met them before tonight." She looked at Sela, who was sitting next to me eating a packet of crackers that someone had found in a break room, with Myra asleep against her shoulder. Then she looked back at me. "Their father is reachable. He's been notified. He's working on emergency transport. There's a relay delay, roughly 14 to 18 hours before he can physically be here even with priority clearance. The interim protocol for Vithan minors without an available guardian is..." She stopped. She picked up her tablet and put it down again. "It's complicated," she said, which was the most human thing she'd said in the whole conversation. "The Vithan family unit structure doesn't map cleanly onto our foster protocols. And we have exactly 1 certified Vithan family in Seattle, and they're currently at capacity." "What does that mean practically?" I asked. "It means that in an ideal world, we'd have a vetted bilingual caregiver to place them with tonight. In the real world, I'm going to be on the phone for about 3 more hours trying to find one." She looked at me again. "You have a daughter." "Emma, she's 8. "Emma 8, and you're a licensed foster parent." "I'm not." "Have you ever had a background check done for?" "I'm a structural engineer. I build bridges. I have never been background checked for childcare purposes." Petra Vance looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Would you be willing to undergo one tonight?" I called Emma's sitter and told her there was a situation and I'd explain tomorrow. I called Emma and said good night and that I loved her and that things were going to be a little unusual for a bit, the way things sometimes got. Emma said, "Okay," in the voice that meant she was already planning questions for the morning. The background check took 40 minutes. It came back clean, as background checks on bridge engineers from Seattle suburbs tend to do. Petra Vance and her colleagues processed a set of emergency temporary guardianship documents that were, she said, technically valid under a GTCE supplementary clause that nobody had actually used before in this district. "I have to be honest," she said. "This is not standard procedure. This is me solving a problem tonight with the tools I have." "I understand. You'll have support. I'll be checking in. Their father will be reachable by comm. Sela knows how to use the unit. It's more sophisticated than the translation disk. And he speaks some English." "Okay. Mr. Marsh," she looked at me seriously, "do you know anything about Vithan children, their needs, their dietary restrictions there?" "No," I said, "but I have a daughter who collects rocks and I've managed not to lose her yet. I'm a fast learner." Petra Vance almost smiled. I walked back into the waiting room to find Sela still awake. She seemed to have a profound mistrust of sleep, or at least of sleeping in strange places, and Myra curled against her, eyes closed, one small fist pressed against her own cheek. Sela looked up at me when I came in. "Are you our person now?" she asked. The translation unit gave it the same flat affect it gave everything, but something in Sela's own voice, the note underneath the English, made the question land differently than it read. "For tonight," I said, "and for as long as you need, your dad is coming." Sela nodded. She reached over very carefully and tucked Myra's jacket more snugly around her sister's shoulders. It was the most practiced, instinctive gesture, the kind of thing you do 1,000 times before you're aware you've learned it. "She doesn't like being cold," Sela said. "Okay," I said, "we'll make sure she's warm." Here is what I did not know about Vithan children, as of midnight on that Wednesday. I did not know that the bioluminescence I'd noticed, the pale pulsing at the temples and collarbones, was tied to emotional state. It was brighter when they were calm, dimmer when they were distressed, and when they were sleeping and dreaming of something good, it went a very soft, steady blue-white, like starlight. I found this out because I checked on them at 2 in the morning and nearly had a small cardiac event when I saw light coming from under the guest room door. I did not know that Vithan children, when they were very tired and very small and very frightened, sometimes made a sound like very quiet, low-frequency humming, not melodic exactly, but resonant, like two tuning forks pressed together. Both of them were doing it in their sleep. It was the saddest and simultaneously most beautiful thing I'd ever heard in my own house. I did not know that their dietary needs, while not drastically incompatible with human food, required the avoidance of anything with concentrated citric acid, anything with capsaicin, and a specific class of proteins found in most processed foods. Petra Vance texted me this list at 6 a.m. along with the note. Eggs, rice, most vegetables, plain chicken or fish, fruit that isn't citrus. You'll be fine. I was not fine exactly, but I was functional. There is a difference. I did not know that Myra did not speak English. Not a word of it. Nothing processable through the translation unit. And that her and Sela's communication in their own language was so rapid and intertwined that even Petra Vance's professional Vithan speaker colleague later told me it was like watching a symphony that two people had written together over 7 years of being the same person. I did not know any of these things. I learned them over the first 24 hours, mostly through observation and error, and a great deal of asking Sela to please tell me what I was doing wrong. Sela was a remarkably good teacher. She was precise, patient, and completely without condescension, which was more than I could say for most adults I'd worked with. Emma came home from school the next day, dumped her backpack in the hall, called out Dad, in the particular tone that meant she'd already heard something from a friend and had questions. She walked into the living room where Sela and Myra were sitting on the couch with a blanket over their laps, watching a nature documentary about ocean fish, because it was the only thing I'd found that both of them seemed to find calming, and stopped in the doorway. The three of them looked at each other. Emma said, "Hi." Sela said, the translation unit catching up, "Hi." Myra looked at Emma for a long moment and then, very precisely, held up 3 fingers. Emma looked at her, then she held up 4 fingers. Myra considered this. She held up 4 fingers too. Emma nodded, apparently satisfied with this exchange, walked over to the other end of the couch, sat down, and started watching the documentary about ocean fish. That was it. That was the whole introduction. I had been preparing a speech. Their father reached us by comm about 18 hours after that first night. His name was Dorek Aviath, and he appeared on the small communication unit Sela had in her jacket pocket, which was, I now understood, an emergency contact device the Vithan consulate had issued to alien children living in human-majority areas, and his face was nothing like what I had expected. I don't know what I expected. He looked like a father. He had the same coloring as the girls, the same amber gold eyes and silver white hair, though his was longer, pulled back. He looked exhausted and frightened and grateful in a way that made all of those emotions into a single complicated expression that I recognized immediately, because I had worn it myself the night Emma fell off a climbing structure at age 5, and I spent 40 minutes in an emergency room waiting to hear that she had not broken her wrist. "Mr. Marsh," he said. The translation came through the comm unit's own system, cleaner and more natural sounding than the girls' discs. I don't have words for what you have done." "You don't need words," I said. "They're fine. They slept. They ate breakfast this morning." He looked past me at the girls, who were visible at the edge of the frame. Myra had pressed close to the camera when she heard his voice, pressing her hand flat against the screen of the device, and Dorek Aviath pressed his hand flat against his own screen on the other side, and neither of them said anything. Sela reached over and held Myra's other hand. "I am coming," he said. "There are delays, the relay transport queue. I am working through it. It may be another," he paused. Something in his expression shifted. "Another 3 days, perhaps 4. "We'll be here," I said. "Take the time you need." "Mr. Marsh." "Daniel." He looked at me. "Daniel, the woman who was supposed to," he stopped again. "We don't have to talk about that now," I said. "No," he said, but he seemed to be working through something complicated in another language and finding no adequate translation for it. "I am sorry," he finally said, "that you were placed in this position. I am sorry that they were placed in this position. And I am grateful in a way I don't have English words for. I would give you the Vithan word, but it might not translate to something that sounds reasonable." "Try it," I said. He said a word in Vithan. It was 2 syllables, soft consonanted. Then he said, "The closest translation is something like the person who holds the rope when you are falling. It is used for someone who keeps something from being lost." I sat with that for a second. "I'll take it," I said. 3 days became 5. 5 became 7. There was a bureaucratic delay on Veth's side, then a transport issue, then a second delay that Petra Vance, who had now become something like a regular presence at my kitchen table, described as the kind of thing that happens when interstellar logistics meet government paperwork. Dorek Aviath communicated with us daily, sometimes twice daily. Every time, the girls pressed themselves close to the comm screen, and every time he signed off, Myra pressed her forehead against the screen for a long moment before letting go. I learned things in those 7 days. I learned that Myra was not quiet because she was shy. She was quiet because she was observing. She cataloged the world in a particular and thorough way, noticing things that the rest of us moved past. The exact color the kitchen light turned when clouds covered the sun, the specific frequency of my refrigerator's hum, the fact that Emma always chewed on her pencil eraser when she was doing math and never when she was reading. She communicated all of this through Sela, through gestures, and through a series of drawings in a notebook I'd given her that were, I want to be precise about this, very, very good. Not for a 7-year-old. Just good, period. I learned that Sela was afraid of the dark, specifically, and not of most other things. She was matter-of-fact and calm in the face of a new house, new food, strange human customs, and a school pickup that included 4 other kids whose names she was memorizing in order of height. But if the lights went out without warning, she grabbed the nearest solid object. Usually, after day 2, that nearest solid object was whatever part of me was closest, and held on until they came back. I kept the hallway light on. This was not a complicated accommodation. I learned that Emma had apparently decided, without consulting me or apparently anyone, that her role in this situation was to be a comprehensive guide to human childhood. She explained the purpose of the rock collection, 1 rock per interesting place, for memory. She explained the rules of the card game she and her friends played at lunch, which had 17 rules and an asterisk clause that I had never fully understood. She explained that the large sound the house made at night was the radiator and not anything alive. She explained that when I burned dinner, which had happened twice this week already, the best response was to order pizza. Myra listened to all of this with the focused, cataloging attention that was her particular way of being in the world, and drew a picture of Emma in the notebook. Emma, when shown it, studied it with the same seriousness Myra had drawn it with, and then said, "You made my nose too small, but my eyes are right." Myra, through Sela's translation, said that she had drawn it exactly as she saw it. Emma considered this, and then said that maybe Emma's nose had always been that size, and she just never noticed. After that, the 2 of them sat at the kitchen table most evenings, Myra drawing and Emma narrating, and I made dinner in the background and tried not to burn anything. On the 5th day, something happened that I want to tell you carefully because it matters. It was about 9 at night. Emma was in bed. Sela and Myra were in the guest room, or they were supposed to be. I was at the kitchen table going through the transit schedule for the next morning because Emma had a dentist appointment, and I was trying to figure out if I could get Sela and Myra to Petra Vance's for 2 hours without disrupting their routine. I heard a sound from the living room, very quiet. That low humming, but softer than usual, slower. I found them on the couch. Myra was asleep, her bioluminescence doing the soft blue-white starlight thing, and Sela was sitting up next to her, knees pulled to her chest, eyes open, looking at nothing. I sat down in the armchair across from them and just waited. After a while, Sela said, through the translation unit, "She dreams about before, when we were home." "On Veth?" "Yes, before our father," she paused, "before he left for the station, when we were all 4. I wasn't sure what to say to that. I wasn't sure any of the right things were words. "She dreams about our mother sometimes too," Sela said. "Even though she doesn't remember her, I try to tell her what I remember, but I don't remember very much." I was 3. "You were 3, I said. "You remember what you can." "I remember she smelled like rain," Sela said. "We don't have rain on Veth, but sometimes when it rains here," she looked at the window. "It was raining, in the way Seattle is always raining, gray and soft and ongoing. Myra woke up in the rain 2 nights ago and she started crying, and I didn't know if it was bad or good, whether the smell made her sad or whether it made her feel near." I sat with that for a long moment. "Probably both," I said. "I think those are the same thing sometimes. Being near something you've lost feels like both at once." Sela looked at me. Her amber gold eyes reflected the lamp. "Are you also someone who has lost something?" she asked. This was a more direct and accurate question than most adults asked me. I thought about Claire, about the way I still sometimes set 2 coffee cups on the counter by habit. I thought about the house we'd planned to buy, the city we'd planned to leave, the version of a life that had folded up quietly and been put away. Some things, I said, not the biggest things I still have. Sela nodded slowly, as if this was information she was filing carefully. She is not hurt, she said finally, meaning Myra, using the same words she'd used in the parking lot. The first thing she'd said to me. She is just, the word in our language is something like a boat that is moored too far from shore. She is okay. She is just waiting for the water to be closer. That's a good word, I said. Our language has good words for missing things, Sela said matter-of-factly. We live very far from things. Dorek Aviath arrived on the 7th night, which was a Saturday. He was taller than I'd expected. Most Vithrans are. And he had the same slightly stunned look of a man who has been moving through bureaucratic machinery for a week and a half at high speed, and has only just realized the machinery has stopped. He came in the door and Sela and Myra hit him like a wave, both of them at once, which nearly knocked him down, which it would have if he hadn't been braced for it. And the sound they all made together was something I have no English word for, and I don't expect to find one. I stood in my kitchen doorway and felt like I was looking through a window into something that was complete and whole and had nothing to do with me. Emma came up and stood next to me. She put her hand in mine, very matter-of-factly, the way she does sometimes when she decides I probably need it. "They're okay," she said. "Yeah," I said. "Both of them?" "Yeah." She leaned against my arm. On the other side of the living room, Dorek Aviath was on his knees with both girls in his arms, their faces pressed against his shoulders, all 3 of them glowing softly. "Dad," Emma said. "Yeah." "Can I tell Myra she can keep the notebook?" I looked down at her. "It's your notebook." "I know." But she filled it. We sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours that night, Dorek Aviath and I, while the girls and Emma eventually retreated to the living room and fell asleep in a pile on the couch the way children do, when they've decided that sleep is technically optional but togetherness is not. Petra Vance had come and gone, dealing with the final formal transfer of guardianship in the brisk and competent way she dealt with everything. The documentation was done. He told me about the station assignment, about the unexpected extension, about the calm delays that had made every conversation feel like shouting through fog. He told me about his wife, the girl's mother, and what she'd been like, not in a sad way but in the way people talk about someone they want you to know was real and particular and specific. He told me that Myra had her mother's way of noticing things, the cataloging attention, the quality of observation. He said this quietly, as if he was still surprised by it sometimes, still ambushed. He told me about the stepmother, briefly, carefully, in the tone of someone who has spent the past week in a controlled burn of a particular feeling, and has arrived on the other side of it into something quieter and colder. "I will not speak badly of her," he said. "She was frightened of them. She had been frightened of them since the beginning, I think. I thought it was a thing that would pass." I was wrong. He was quiet for a moment. "I believed what I wanted to believe. That is a failing. It is my failing. What happened to them?" He stopped. "They were alone in that parking lot for 2 hours." "I know," I said. "They were alone," he said again, and the word alone carried a weight in it that pressed down on the table between us. "They found each other," I said. "They always had each other. Sela kept Myra warm and found the translation disc and answered every question I asked and made sure I knew what Myra needed. She did all of that. They're not," I tried to find the right word. "They're not fragile. They're scared and they're sad about specific things and they miss you and they're going to need time. But they're not broken." He looked at me. "I know they're not broken," he said. "I know them, but I am their father. I am allowed to be." "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, you are." We sat with that for a moment. "The word you used," I said, "the one that means the person who holds the rope. Did you mean it?" "Yes." "I want you to know I didn't do anything extraordinary," I said. "I found them in a parking lot. I called it in. I kept the hallway light on and I made eggs and I learned that Myra doesn't like citrus. That's the whole of it." Dorek Aviath shook his head, not in disagreement exactly, in the way of someone correcting a misunderstanding. "Unveth," he said, "there is a belief it is old, older than the compact, older than most things we still say, that the worst thing that can happen to a child is to fall and find no one willing to catch. Not because of the falling. Falling is survivable, but because of what it teaches them about the world." He looked through the doorway into the living room at the three small shapes on the couch. "You caught them, Daniel. You didn't have to. You didn't know them. You could have waited for someone else, some official with the right certification, and it would have taken hours. But you stayed. You called it in and you stayed." "I couldn't leave them," I said. "It was a simple statement, the simplest kind of true thing. I just couldn't." He nodded. "That is the whole word," he said. "That is exactly the word." They stayed 2 more nights, both of them, because Dorek Aviath was reorganizing their apartment across town. He'd been on the station for 6 weeks, and the place had, he said with some dryness, developed the character of a place no one was living in. And because Emma had asked, with the careful and specific seriousness that Emma brought to all requests she considered important, if Myra could come to see her rock collection before she left. Myra spent 45 minutes with Emma's shoebox of pavement rocks. She examined each one. She asked questions through Sella that Emma answered in detail, where this one came from, what she'd been doing that day, what made her notice it when she saw it. Myra drew 3 of them in the new notebook I'd given her, which was also now filling up. When it was over, Myra reached into the pocket of her jacket, the navy one, the one she'd been wearing in the parking lot, and took something out and put it on Emma's bedspread. It was a small, smooth, flat stone the color of deep water, very dark gray-green, with a faint iridescent quality that caught the light. Emma looked at it, she looked at Myra. Myra said something through Sella. "She found it outside your house. The second morning. She says it is the most interesting one she has seen here." Emma picked it up and held it in her palm. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Myra and said, 74, and held up the shoebox. Myra's bioluminescence did the thing it did when she was calm, and something was good, bright and steady, pulling toward blue-white at the edges. She held up one finger. Emma nodded, 74 total, one from Myra. They left on a Tuesday. I carried the bag with the girls' things to Dorek Aviath's car. It took 2 trips because there were, by now, more things than there had been when they arrived. The notebooks, some books Emma had given them, a soft weighted blanket I'd bought because Sella had mentioned once, almost as an aside, that the weight helped Myra sleep, and a bag of food for the drive across town that Dorek Aviath politely tried to decline, and I politely refused to take back. Emma hugged both girls. She was not ordinarily a hugger. She came from a long line of people who express affection through observation and potato chips, but she hugged both of them, briefly and hard. Then Sella stepped in front of me. She tilted her head back to look up at me and said, through the translation unit, very clearly, "The word my father used, the rope word, I know it too, I knew it before he said it." I crouched down so we were on the same level. "Yeah. I thought of it," she said, "in the parking lot, when you sat down on the ground, when you just sat down and waited." She paused. "You sat down on the ground in a parking lot, that was not a dignified thing." "No," I agreed, "it wasn't." "But it was right," she said. "It was the right thing." That is when I thought the word. I didn't have anything adequate to say to that, so I just said, "You're going to be okay, Sella, both of you." She nodded solemn, "We know." Then Myra stepped in front of me, and I thought she was going to say something through the translation unit, but instead she just put her arms around my neck, very briefly, and pressed her face against my shoulder, and then stepped back. That was all. That was the whole of it. I didn't see them for 3 weeks. Then Dorek Aviath messaged me through the GTCE's civilian contact portal, which is exactly as cumbersome as it sounds, and asked if we would like to have dinner. Not in a formal way. In the way a person asks when they have decided that a person is worth the continuing effort of proximity. We said yes. We had dinner at a Vithan restaurant in the Alien District, the one Emma said tasted like soup made from a thunderstorm, which she had reconsidered and now described as mostly good with one weird note in the middle. We ate things I had learned to like over the course of a week of very educational breakfasts, and Myra drew the restaurant in her notebook, and Emma explained the asterisk clause of her card game to Sella, who identified 3 logical inconsistencies in it, which Emma took very well. We did it again 3 weeks after that, and again. I want to tell you about a moment from about 6 months in, because I think it is the whole story in one image. It was December. We were at Dorek Aviath's apartment for a dinner that had evolved from a formal occasion into the kind of thing where you arrive and immediately make yourself useful in the kitchen. Emma and Myra were at the table, Myra drawing, Emma narrating, their established arrangement, and I was standing at the stove working on something rice-based, while Dorek Aviath was on the phone with a consulate official about something bureaucratic that I was not following. Sella came into the kitchen and climbed onto the counter next to the stove in the unself-conscious way that children climb onto things, and sat there watching me cook. "You are getting better," she said. "I burned things last time," I said. "But not as many things, and you are learning which things burn easily. That is progress." "Thank you, Sella." She watched me stir for a while, then she said, "When we were in the parking lot, do you remember what you did first?" I asked if you were hurt. "Before that, you heard us and you came toward us. You didn't stop. Some people, we had heard other people walking in the lot earlier and they went a different way, but you heard us and you came." I thought about that. I remembered the sound, the low woven interference pattern sound, and the way my feet had just taken me toward it before my brain had quite processed what I was doing. "I heard you," I said, "that's all." "That's all," Sella repeated. She seemed to find this satisfying. She sat quietly for a moment, bioluminescence doing its calm, steady pulse. Myra says that the stone she gave Emma is the most important stone in Emma's collection. Emma would probably agree. Emma did agree. She put it at the front of the box. Sella looked at the doorway into the dining room where we could see the top of Myra's head bent over her notebook. "That is where you put the most important one, at the front." I looked at Sella. "Where do you keep the most important things?" I asked. Sella thought about this with her characteristic precision. "Close," she said. "You keep them close." I told Emma this story, the whole of it. The parking lot and the first night and the rice and Sella's translation unit and the rope word, when she was 9, almost a year after it had happened. I told it to her the way I hoped to tell it to you, honestly, and without pretending I was anything other than a man who sat down on a parking lot in October and waited. Emma listened to the whole thing. She had already lived most of it alongside me, but children experience things differently from inside them than from the outside, and she deserved to hear the shape of it. When I was done, she said, "Dad, you sat down on the asphalt." "Yeah." "In a parking lot." "Yeah." "You got your jeans dirty." "Emma." "I'm saying," she said, with the particular patience of an Emma, "that you sat down on the ground so they wouldn't be the only ones on the ground, so they wouldn't be alone down there. You got down to where they were." I thought about this. "I didn't think about it," I said. "I just did it." Emma nodded in a way that suggested this was exactly the point. "Dad," she said, "can I tell you something?" "Yeah." "I told Myra about that, about you sitting down, when you were talking to the police, She already knew, obviously, but I told her what it looked like from the outside. Emma picked at a thread on her sleeve. She said she already knew you were safe right then, before you asked if they were hurt before any of it, because you sat down. I didn't say anything. The refrigerator hummed. Outside it was raining in the Seattle way, soft and gray and ongoing. She said on their world, Emma said, when adults want to talk to children, they kneel down or sit down so they're not, towering. I didn't know that. I know, that's the thing, you didn't know it and you did it anyway. Emma looked at me. It's just what you do, you get down to where people are. I am still not a hero. I am a structural engineer. I build bridges, the ordinary kind that nobody photographs. I make eggs and I occasionally burn rice, and I still sometimes set 2 coffee cups out on the counter by habit. Emma is 9 now, going on 37, and she has 75 rocks in a shoebox under her bed. I see Sela and Myra most weeks. Myra has filled 4 notebooks. Sela has begun to read English, not fluently, but with the same precise, systematic approach she brings to everything. Dorek Aviath and I have, over the course of about 40 dinners and 2 very long conversations, and 1 memorable evening, watching a terrible action movie together while the kids were asleep, become the kind of friends that people become when they meet in circumstances that skip the usual layers of approach and deposit them directly into something real. He still uses the word sometimes. The rope word. I've learned to say it in Vithan now. Sela taught me, corrected my pronunciation 3 times, told me I was getting it approximately right, which from Sela is a standing ovation. I don't know what the right word for it is in English. There isn't one, I think. Not one that says all of it, the parking lot and the hallway light and the eggs, and the sitting down on the asphalt, and all the dinners after. But I know what it means. I know what it means to be the person holding the rope. And I know this. I was not looking for a miracle in that parking lot. I was not expecting anything except my car and the drive home and the leftover pasta in my fridge. What I got instead was 2 small lights in the dark, and a word I didn't have before, and 75 rocks in a shoebox, and a table with people around it that I would not trade for any simpler version of any life I could have lived. Myra drew a picture of my house once from the outside, from the driveway on a rainy day. She gave it to me the next time we came over and watched me look at it, and when I looked up, she was watching me with the cataloging attention that was entirely her own. In the drawing, the windows of my house were glowing. I asked Sela what color she'd drawn them in, because the notebook was gray-toned, just pencil, and I couldn't tell. Sela asked Myra. Myra said something in 2 syllables, soft consonanted, the same shape as the rope word but smaller. Sela said, she says warm. That's it, that's the whole of it. Warm. End of story. Production notes, Phase 2 reference asterisk. Stream, asterisk wholesome found family G. Engine, asterisk G+A. Human narrator type, civilian single parent structural engineer / wit or adjacent. Alien female role, asterisk twin girls child stream, plus Vithan father as supporting adult. Setting, asterisk Earth domestic suburb, parking lot, alien district restaurant. Obstacle, asterisk abandonment by stepmother, bureaucratic transit delay preventing father's return. Mood, asterisk tender slow burn right arrow quiet triumphant warmth, wholesome W. Ending type, asterisk reunion father returns, plus quiet domestic warmth ongoing found family. Film seed mood applied. 2 overwhelming forces grief plus strangeness, crashing down on one small man. He holds the line through sheer presence. Estimated word count, asterisk tilde 10 200 words, tilde 64 minutes at 160 WPM. Thumbnail direction, Phase 2. Setting, warm domestic light, kitchen or living room, soft evening palette. Subject, Two small alien girls, silver white hair, amber gold eyes, soft bioluminescent glow. Human anchor, father figure seen from behind or three-quarter, foreground. Emotion, the girls looking up, soft wonder, some residual fragility, beginning of safety. Palette, warm gold amber, low evening light, gentle glow from the girls. Locked aesthetic line plus, locked negative prompt per niche Bible section 15, verbatim append.